And I said, honey, in the streets they may call me PeeWee, but in the sheets, well, they still call me PeeWee. And oh, hi there, sorry about that, didn't see ya. Welcome back to another Cold Blood and Cocktails. As you beautiful people know, any tiff you may have, please cast it away because this is a channel of positive energy, okay? Thank you. Oh, my little pickleball sniffers, how you doing today? I hope wherever you're at in the world, you're having a great day so far. Oh my gosh, it feels so good to be doing one of these. It has been way too fucking long. I've actually had this story ready to go for several months with this costume, but the actor who plays Pee-wee Herman, Paul Reubens, passed away. I know he's not here anymore, but I just have to thank him for all of the love and laughter that he brought for so many years. It is truly an honor to be here today presenting as some sort of him. Today's case is about a gentleman named Pee-wee, but totally fucking different. This dude was a piece of shit, but you can't cover a story with a guy named Pee-wee and not dress as Pee-wee. So today's costume is of the utmost respect and a huge tribute to the late and great Paul Reubens. So my loves, let's dive into this, and cheers to you. Today we're drinking a Pee-wee Herman, which is Orange Crush and Tennessee whiskey. All right, baby. Ooh, that's sweet. And you know what? In addition to suspicious shots today, let's have an fucking course shot, because today especially, it is just filled with fucking courses everywhere. Oh, strap your girdle, Myrtle, because this is a doozy. I mean, they all are, but holy hell. This dude, Pee-wee, he was just a piece of work. He was also called a redneck Charles Manson to put shit into perspective. And I do have to warn you, this case does talk about young girls being sexually assaulted, which I will not go into detail about, but this psycho was a sick fuck. So, who the hell was this peeny fella? Well, his real name was Donald, and he was born in 1933 in good old South Carolina. Also, if you catch me switching between Donald and Pee-wee, they're the same people, I'm sorry. If I can make anything more confusing, bitch, you know I will. Also, wasn't our last person from South Carolina too? That was a good ass costume, go watch that. Anyways, Pee-wee was kind of the runt of the litter, and because he was so itty bitty, his child nickname was Pee-wee. And shit, no wonder this kid turned out to be so fucking angry, wouldn't you if your name was Pee-wee? Out of all the names, that's what you had to settle with. But even when he grew up, he was like 5'4", weighed 130 pounds, soaking wet with rocks in his pockets. But even though he was a cute little pocket-sized man, he had big issues growing up. He did end up being a serial killer, and like 9 out of 10 times that shit stems from awful childhood, so are we surprised? I think the hell not, Cecilia. And Pee-wee had mommy issues, of fucking course. Shot for that. But in his defense, she was kind of a bitch. She decided to ignore him almost from the moment he came out of her. Not to mention, he would be sexually abused by one of the men in the family, and she could not care any less. In fact, she gave so few shits about him that he didn't even realize his name was Donald and not Pee-wee until she was on the court stand for his murder trials. How in the salty armpit does that shit even happen? Like, she never called him Donald? No Donnie baby? No, she was always like, come here, you little shit stain. How sad. Well, this lack of love brewed inside of him like the airport shits and kind of created a monster. And the worst type of monster too, the good-looking, innocent-seeming kind. Innocent my left ass cheek. Everyone that knew him would go on and on about how fabulous of a manipulator he was. He was smart with a marvelous sense of humor. He could have you eating mercury out of the palm of your own hand. Just one flash of those striking eyes and that small man could give you mighty feelings. And all those things combined, as we all know, can make a devil in disguise. I think we need more. But even as a toddler, he was a little bit of a troubled soul. The kid drank a whole bottle of kerosene, which caused him to be a little bit fucked up till he was like 3. And he seemed to graduate from drinking kerosene to doing something equally as dangerous. Now that he was approaching his teen years, he joined a children's street gang. Like, I didn't even know those were a thing. Sounds kind of adorable, like little tiny chains and whatnot. But honey, this was not some Sesame Street bullshit. It was legit. They burgled, they sexually assaulted people, they spray painted peonies on buildings, hot wired cars, shot shit up like these were bad kids. Where are their mothers? By the time he was only 13, he'd already been convicted of clomping a young lady over the head with an axe when she caught him breaking into her house. So he was sent to a reform school for 5 years, and then the tables kind of turned for him. He was now the one being sexually assaulted by the students or inmates or whatever the fuck they were, and it was kind of like a kill or be killed situation. A situation, if one will. One night though, Pee-wee Shawshanked his ass out of there and went on the run, which is where he met a pretty innocent seeming young gal who liked Donnie's wild side. Ooh, he was bad to the bone and she just had to have him. So they immediately get hitched because that's just always the right thing to do. And Donald thought, you know what? I'm gonna turn over a new leaf and turn myself in. With someone on the outside to live for now, he just breezed right through his sentence and was released at 18. All was good, right? He found love, got on the straight and narrow, and that's the end of the story. Yeah, right, would we be here if that were the case. Of fucking course not, you silly pickle. Have a drink. Donald took his little PeeWee to a tobacco farm to work, but quickly got let go for hitting yet another young lady over the head with a hammer after she insulted him. What was it with this buttfuck hitting ladies over the head? Well, this time he went to prison for 6 years, but now instead of being someone's little bitch in prison, he's like, no, this prison is my bitch. Donald was like, I am never letting anyone fucking touch me again. He'd been picked on by literally every person he'd ever met, and in his eyes, the world fucked him left, right, and upside down, which normally sounds like a good time, but not in this case. So he looks around for the big cell block poopah and tries to figure out who the most important person is. If he was gonna finally be top dog, he'd have to take that top dog down. So when PeeWee sees this inmate in the showers the next day, he slowly creeps up behind him and as smooth as cut in chocolate silk pie, he sliced the guy's throat. Like, what the hell? How do you just do that? Of course, Donald was like, oh, it was self-defense, but now that the other inmates saw what he was capable of, nobody argued with him. This didn't come without a price, though. He got an extra 3 years for involuntary manslaughter, but from then on, he was the miniature alpha of the block. But also, what the hell? He only got 3 extra years for murdering someone? Bitch, make that shit make sense. But just like he had done when he was more youthful, he once again escaped prison, and this time he hid in the back of a garbage truck and fled to Florida and became a carny. I mean, haven't we all done the same? Well, just before he'd broken out, he'd been served divorce papers from his wife, which you go, girl. But this gave him a massive rager. Wait, no, this put him into a massive rage. There we go. And now he was on the hunt for another poor unfortunate soul to wife up. And he did end up finding a young lady, but their marriage lasted less than 2 weeks. At least he didn't kill her though, silver lining people. Well, they break up, and then a few days later, PeeWee spots a new hot young thing and they decide to get their freak on. Her name was Betty, and she herself was a bit of a naughty hottie with the law. In fact, her whole family seemed to be rule breakers, which really made PeeWee's rocks tumble till they were shiny. When he and Betty were laying in the cheap motel bed, she says, hey, my little stud, my brother's getting out of jail today. Want to come pick him up with me? Oh man, did this kind of talk really get PeeWee's PeeWee going. So he's like, of course, babe. So off they went, and PeeWee really didn't even think twice when the man jumped in and was like, go, go, go. He knew what it was like getting out of jail. You just want to get the hell out of there. Well, what PeeWee didn't know was that Betty's brother wasn't just released, he'd escaped just like he himself had. And damn was it a nail to the ball sack when he found out that this wasn't Betty's brother, it was her husband. PeeWee was like, you know, come to think of it, it was a little bit weird that Betty and her brother had made out when he got into the car. He just assumed they'd been really close. But PeeWee really didn't have time to get pissed because soon there was a knock at the motel door from the cops looking for the brother. Of fucking course. As I'm sure you can tell, we're dealing with a group of people that's about one Fruit Loop shy from an empty box. So even when PeeWee quit, put a scarf around his head, slapped on some lipstick, threw on a pair of kitten heels and some Anna Wintour shades, the police instantly recognized him and he was hauled in to serve his remaining 6 years with a little extra time for helping an inmate escape. Seriously though, this dude was in prison more than he wasn't. You'd think at some point he'd just get sick of the food and get his shit together. But when does that ever happen here? No. And when he got out again, he had to go be a titty twist and steal more shit and just be an awful person. He most recently brutally sexually assaulted a 12-year-old girl, and then when he made bond, he stole a car and fled to North Carolina to start a new life. He was finally like, new year, new me, bitches. It wasn't a new him at all. He met a young lady, which, of course, much too quickly became his wife. As one could imagine, he was a freak in the sheets, but a man of the streets, and his new wife didn't really like that. He'd come home with weird blood stains on his clothes, patches of hair missing like a street cat, and honestly, his freaky sheet shit was going from a masterpiece to a masterpiece. It was sloppy, he was rude, and when she wasn't interested anymore, rather than working it out, he became a fucking barbarian and forced it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't fucking do that ever, especially in a relationship. But that put her over the freaking edge, as one could imagine. She ended up turning his tiny ass into the local police and had him arrested for sexually assaulting her. You go, girl. He was sentenced to yet another 6 years in prison and then was released in 1968. So that's a little bit about PeeWee. Just a little tiny backstory. As if what we've said so far wasn't enough to deduce that he was a fucking garbage person, his murderous rampage hadn't even started. By now, he'd been divorced from his first wife for 12 years, divorced from his second wife for 11, and his third wife for 6. He had no job resume, no references, no close family, he just existed. Except now, he'd developed feelings. Certainly not feelings of warmth and love, it's not like he turned into a Zen monk or something. This was the exact opposite, in fact. He now had feelings of anger and bloodlust with slight constipation, but that last part didn't matter. What a lucky fella he was when one day he found a way to satiate his feelings. He'd spotted a hitchhiker that needed a ride, and of fucking course, the hitchhiker was female, which is, you know, a great idea. It was very common practice. People were extremely trusting. But they were kind of vibing until PeeWee showed her his tattoos. I'm sure you're thinking these are like badass prison tattoos or portraits, something cool. cool. Well, no, his tattoos were his nickname, Pee-wee, but written all over his body. Literally the least manly thing you could ever do. How could this woman take anyone seriously when they've got Pee-wee written all over themselves? Like, is this supposed to be super butch and bro-y? She's like, look here, you little tiny tater tot. No. Well, if her giggling at his tats wasn't embarrassing enough, Pee-wee pulled out his teeny weeny and she just lost her shit. It's like she was an audience member at the Apollo. She just couldn't stop laughing, and that royally pissed Pee-wee off. He pulled to the side of the road and was like, look, Becky. And she looked and he was just staring at her. But before she knew it, he pounced and attacked the poor woman, bringing her within an inch of her life. He tortured her, brutally assaulted her sexually, and then weighed her body down, watching her drown in a swamp. And suddenly, this monster turned into the fucking Demogorgon. This killing was different than what he'd done in prison. That was for status. This was for fun. Not even for fun, for therapy. You know, like how some of us do yoga or run, or actually go see a fucking therapist? No, he killed people. He even developed 2 split names between his kills like an organized little bitch. There were his coastal kills, which were just random people who happened to have the misfortune of meeting him. Then there were his serious kills, which were people he actually knew. The hitchhiker had been his first coastal kill, which was soon followed by his first serious kill. And Pee-wee liked his girls young and defenseless. Basically because literally anyone else could take him on and flick his jelly bean-sized ass into the next time zone. But in Pee-wee's mind, luring his 15-year-old niece and her 17-year-old gal pal into an abandoned home was only natural. So was attempting to sexually assault them, but his niece actually ended up roundhouse kicking his ass while her friend banged his head against the old turntable. Sadly though, somehow Pee-wee managed to overtake both girls and beat them almost to death before drowning them in different locations. His own family, like, how fucking sad. Even if it wasn't his own family, this is sad. Like, what the hell? His next victim's name was Martha, who was a young gal that Pee-wee decided should be poisoned. People aren't certain if he took her life because she told him he was the baby daddy to her unborn child, or because she had been a drug dealer. Either way, the poor woman's life was taken by this loony. A little time goes on and Pee-wee starts eyeing his pregnant neighbor, who he'd actually known for several years. She was a lovely lady with a little 2-year-old, and she could tell that it was all candle and no wick in that head of his. Everyone in town tried to steer clear of Pee-wee because they knew he was kind of a hot-headed son of a bitch, but this neighbor, Doreen, had a big heart. She'd see him all alone and think, he's just misunderstood. I bet you he needs a friend. So they did actually become friends. They'd have tea on Thursdays, they'd chat about life and talk about all their favorite hot goss, and Doreen completely ignored all the rumors around Pee-wee. She even laughed when he purchased a big black hearse in 1973. She laughed even harder when he'd joke with people saying that he needed it to haul dead bodies to his personal cemetery. Oh, Pee-wee, such a jokester. People were just creeped out by him, except poor Doreen, who had no fucking idea that he was being dead-ass serious. And she certainly didn't think anything of asking him for a ride to the bus station for her daughter and her to take a little trippy trip they'd been planning. They hopped in the hearse, which worked out perfectly because all of their luggage fit nicely in the back. But Pee-wee was not just a murderous little shit stain, he was a racist one too, and did not like the fact that Doreen had not one biracial baby, but soon to be 2. What a dick. And to deal with his anger, instead of, you know, just not being friends with Doreen, he decided, no bus stop for you. Instead, he drove to a wooded area where he assaulted and drowned her in front of her child. And then the sick fuck turns to the 2-year-old and does the same thing to her. A 2-year-old, what the fuck? Oh my gosh. I told you this was heavy. Pee-wee buried them next to each other in his own personal cemetery, just like how he joked with people. Except it wasn't a fucking joke, people. You'd think that after an incident like this, his killing streak would be done, but the maniac was only just warming up. And since he didn't really have a job resume, he made crime his profession. He'd purchased an auto shop, which he'd bring stolen cars to and then trick them out and resell them. If the dumbass had spent this much trouble being an honest person versus a dishonest person, he'd probably have been a millionaire. But over the next 6 years, his body count was rising, and his latest victims were the owners of a minivan that now needed to be spruced up and sold. So Pee-wee calls up his friend Walter to help drive the van to his shop. This was the only thing that all 3 of the people living in the van had, and Pee-wee took all 3 of them down like wet paper airplanes. But his friends knew exactly what Pee-wee was, a murderer, and they were cool with it, even in on it. One of his friends, John, was like, so in addition to your little auto body shop, would you maybe want to, I don't know, kill for hire? Oh, the number of times I've been approached with that same exact question. Pee-wee was like, well, shit, I'm gonna kill anyways. I might as well get some mala for it, baby. So a woman named Suzanne gives Pee-wee $1,500 to kill her ex-boyfriend Silas, and the murder games begin. Pee-wee calls up his friend Diane and her boyfriend and is like, hey, you got any plans tonight? Well, they were gladly in on this scheme too. Diane would knock on Silas's door and say, oh, I'm having car troubles. Please, could you help a maiden in need? And when he followed her out to the car, she and the boyfriend kidnapped him and brought him to Pee-wee. And being a big mini mafia man now, Pee-wee killed poor Silas and front of Diane and her boyfriend, which seemed to not really faze them at all because they then buried the body in the private cemetery. But honey, once you bring more meat into the mixture, the higher your chances are of spoiling. And this was about to get nasty and messy. Diane and her boyfriend suddenly decided to grow a pair and blackmail PeeWee for $5 grand. And they were like, if you don't pay up, we'll tell the police everything that we just did. And it was this point that really made PeeWee's life flip upside down and do a full spin. Do you think he started going by Weepy? Well, amidst all this fucking chaos, he had tried to make advances on a 13-year-old who of course rejected his nasty ass, which sadly meant that she was added to his private cemetery. Diane and her boyfriend somehow found out about this and had assumed that this was his only other murder apart from Silas, so they were like, bitch, now you really need to pay up because we know about all this. Oh honey, if they only actually knew. But still, he didn't want to go back to prison, so he'd have to pay up. He knew he shouldn't have enlisted help and regretted it even more when yet another friend backstabbed him. When it rains, it pours, and the fucking roof was about to cave in on PeeWee. A little bit after Diane had blackmailed him, a few local teenagers broke into PeeWee's shop, so of course he had to hunt them down, lure them into the woods, kill the pair of them, and dump their bodies, because a little talking to wouldn't have sufficed. But he couldn't bury these new bodies alone, so he'd asked his friend Walter to help bury them. Most friends would call and ask if you want to go to Buffalo Wild Wings or sit in the sun at the YMCA, but not PeeWee. No, he bonded over murder like it was a game of fucking golf. And while they were digging the hole for these two burglars, PeeWee was having a special moment with Walter and was proudly showing him all of the spots he'd buried bodies. It was almost like they were trophies for him, the little sick fuck. Walter was very confused because he'd only known of a few bodies, people who PeeWee had killed for revenge or for hire, which I guess that was okay with Walter. But what wasn't okay with Walter was the fact that clearly PeeWee was killing for fun and was on a fucking rampage. But still, he agreed to help PeeWee bury the bodies, and damn it, he'd earned that case of beer at the end of the night. Well, shortly after, the disappearance of the 13-year-old PeeWee had killed a few weeks prior started to really spark interest with authorities. Everyone knew that PeeWee was more than a little bit suspicious, and when authorities caught a whiff of his bullshit, they immediately searched his home. Like, move, bitch, get out the way, we're coming in. And to nobody's surprise, police almost immediately found clothes that belonged to the young girl that they were looking for. Suspicious? I think the fuck so. PeeWee was brought in, but it wasn't him that broke down, it was his friend Walter that had spilled all the beans. Walter told the police everything and even brought them to PeeWee's private cemetery. Okay, Walter, I see you. I mean, not saying he's a good person because he totally helped, but still, yay for bringing someone down. But even though the killings weren't performed together, nobody could prove that, so the pair was charged with 8 counts of murder. My goodness, that must have been a bigger shock than a poker to the tit for Walter. PeeWee ended up being sentenced to death, but his ass was hustling to avoid that shit. He was like, how about this? I'll tell you about 7 more murders if you let me live. Which he did, and then the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional, and instead he'd be given 7 life sentences. But then in a roller coaster of affairs, like 2 years later, the death penalty was restored. It didn't apply to PeeWee though until he done fucked his shit up again and took payment to murder a fellow inmate. Talk about tomfoolery, like fuck. He was convicted of yet another murder and re-sentenced to death. So once again, he started confessing to even more murders to avoid the chair. This time though, he admitted to killing someone who someone else was already in prison for killing. So the court was like, you're a lying sack of toad turds, shut the hell up. PeeWee ended up working with an author to write a book, but he did indeed die by electrocution in 1991. Nobody knows if the murders he admitted to committing were actually true or not. According to him, he'd murdered 110 people, but only 15 could be confirmed. If what he admitted to was true though, he'd be South Carolina's most prolific serial killer. Not a good brag, folks, not at all. But damn, didn't this dude freaking suck? It's so sad, all those people died for just no reason. Anyways, my loves, there you go. Thank you so much for being here. I love having you. And you know what? If you want just a little bit more me in your life, head over to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/poplux. You get videos a day early, you get Patreon only content, you get a Patreon only store, and best part, it's cheap, fun, and fancy just like me. And don't forget, my latest Repop collection is available at repopcosmetics.com. Comment down below, let me know what you thought of this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter at officialnady, and you can follow me online at thepoplux.com. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all, and I will see you again soon. Bye!